The train screeched to a halt at Pine Ridge, Wyoming, its wheels screaming against the tracks. Emma Lawson stepped down the iron stairs, her dress torn at the hem, one sleeve ripped clean off, streaked with dust and blood. The parasol she once carried was gone, lost somewhere between fear and chaos. Her hat had been trampled in the last carriage during the nightmare she wished she could forget. It had all happened barely an hour earlier. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. At a small junction stop, 3 drunken men had climbed aboard, laughing, stinking of whiskey and trouble. They swaggered down the aisle like they owned it. One older man tried to stop them, but they shoved him back into his seat, their eyes already searching for mischief. The conductor was nowhere nearby, maybe in another car, unaware of the noise. When one of them reached for Emma's skirt, she pushed him with all the strength she had. The train jerked forward at that very moment, metal screaming beneath them, and she used that jolt to her advantage, shoving him hard into his seat before bolting toward the next car. A slap caught her arm as she ran, leaving a sting that would bruise purple before the day ended. Her sleeve tore at the seam, white fabric stained by dirt and fear. The other passengers looked away, pretending not to see, pretending not to hear. She stumbled into her seat, breath shaking, hands trembling as she tried to hold herself together. Her heart pounded so hard she thought the whole train could hear it. Now, standing on the empty platform under the blazing noon sun, her body still trembled. She wanted to vanish, to forget it all. The wind blew hot and sharp, burning her cheeks as if punishing her for surviving. Then, from the shadows at the edge of the platform, a deep voice called her name. Emma Lawson. She turned, startled, and saw him. A man stood there, Jack Mallory, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weathered hat that cast a shadow across his face. A faint scar cut down his cheek, and his eyes, gray as storm clouds, held both strength and something broken. He didn't say a word about her torn dress or the fear on her face. He simply took off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. The gesture was small, but it cracked something inside her that had been holding tight since the train. "You're Jack," she whispered. He nodded once. "You came a long way for someone like me." "I came for a promise," she said softly, her voice trembling but steady enough to hold his gaze. He studied her for a moment, then motioned toward the wagon waiting nearby. "Let's get you off this platform." The wheels creaked as they rolled down the dusty road, sunlight burning gold across the fields. Emma sat silent, clutching his coat tight around her. The smell of leather and tobacco felt grounding, something solid after the chaos. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she finally asked, "Did you write all those letters?" Jack's grip on the reins tightened. "My brother wrote most of them. He passed last winter." Her stomach dropped. She had crossed half the country for a ghost. The man beside her wasn't the gentle voice from those letters. He was a man carved from loss and work and silence. The West, she realized, wasn't a dream, it was a test. But there was something about the way he said her name, low and steady, that made her heart stumble. Because before summer's end, she would look this man in the eyes and say words no woman had dared before. The wagon rattled across the dirt road, every turn carrying her farther from her old life and deeper into something she didn't yet understand. The horizon stretched endlessly, green and gold, shimmering in the heat. Jack pointed once toward it and said quietly, "That's my place. Not much to look at, but it's mine." When they reached the ranch, Emma saw a small cabin leaning with age, a barn missing half its boards, and a patch of corn fighting for life in dry soil. Yet the air smelled clean, free. Jack helped her down gently, his rough hand steady at her waist. That brief touch made her heart skip. Inside, the cabin was plain, a wooden table, 2 chairs, and a coffee pot that looked older than both of them combined. Jack poured her a cup, black and bitter, and said, "Drink it, or it'll drink you." She let out a shaky laugh, the first one all day. It wasn't funny, but it felt like life again. Then Jack stood, grabbed a measuring tape from the windowsill, and motioned for her to follow him outside. "You see this dirt?" he said, kneeling by the ground. "It's 11 inches deep. That's the good stuff, the kind that'll feed us if we treat it right. Emma blinked, her cheeks flushing. The way he said it, so serious, made her heart jump for the wrong reason. I came here for marriage, Mr. Mallory, she said nervously, stepping back. Not for that. Jack looked confused, then laughed. A low, warm sound that cut through the awkwardness. Lord, no, ma'am. I meant the soil's 11 inches deep, not me. He held up the tape with a grin. Emma froze, then laughed too. The tension melted, replaced by something lighter, something dangerously close to hope. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Jack said quietly, "You stay, we build this together. You go, the ticket back's yours." Emma looked out over the field, glowing gold beneath the fading light. 11 inches of soil, maybe 11 inches of fate. She didn't know yet that the night ahead would uncover something buried far deeper than either of them imagined. That night, the wind whispered around the cabin like an old ghost searching for a way in. Emma couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the sound of the train came back. The scrape of boots, the laughter, the slap, the scream that never quite left her throat. She sat up on the small cot, staring at the wooden ceiling while the fire crackled low. The smell of smoke and pine filled the room. Jack paced by the window, his boots creaking against the old floorboards. He moved with a limp she hadn't noticed before, slow and careful, as if each step carried more than pain. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost afraid to break the silence. "You always walk like that." Jack stopped, his back still to her. For a second, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, "Rodeo accident. Back in '93. Bull tossed me halfway across Wyoming. Been paying rent to my limp ever since." She smiled despite herself. That's one way to put it. He turned slightly, the firelight catching the scar on his cheek. "You get used to carrying pain out here," he said. "Only thing is, you never know if it's the kind that heals or stays." His words hit her harder than she expected. She looked down, rubbing the edge of his coat between her fingers. "Some pain," she murmured, "just follows you, no matter how far you run." Jack didn't reply. He just nodded once and sat down on the other chair near the fire. They sat like that, two broken people breathing the same quiet, until the wood burned low and the stars began to fade outside. The next morning, sunlight poured through the window, like it was trying to chase away their ghosts. Emma stepped outside and froze. Jack was already there, shirtless, splitting wood. His shoulders flexed with every swing, the rhythm steady and strong. The sound of the axe hitting the block echoed across the field. She looked away fast, but not fast enough. "You ever chop wood, city girl?" he asked, his tone teasing. "No," she said, crossing her arms. "But I've broken hearts." He chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Reckon that's harder work." The space between them felt lighter then, a little less heavy with memory. For the first time since she'd arrived, Emma smiled without forcing it. Days began to blend together. She learned to milk the cow, hang the laundry so it didn't blow away, and cook beans that didn't taste like burnt leather. Jack taught her how to aim his old rifle, saying, "Every woman in Wyoming should know how to scare off a coyote." She never pulled the trigger, but she liked the way he stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the steadiness of his breath. Sometimes he'd hum while they worked, off-key but gentle, and she'd join in, laughing until her sides hurt. But at night, the laughter faded and the dark crept back in. Emma still woke from dreams she couldn't escape. The smell of whiskey, the sound of fists, the way the passengers looked away. Sometimes she'd find herself sitting by the fire, shaking. Jack never asked what happened. He just poured her coffee and sat across from her in silence. Somehow, that silence was safer than words. One evening, as the sun slid behind the distant hills, painting the world gold and soft, Jack broke that silence. "You know," he said quietly, "you don't owe me anything. You can leave any time." Emma looked at him, her hands wrapped around the mug. "Maybe I'm not here because I owe you," she said slowly. "Maybe I'm here because this is the first place that feels real." He didn't say anything after that. He just gave a small nod, his eyes fixed on the horizon, the same horizon that had begun to tie their hearts together without either of them realizing it. From that day forward, the air around them changed. It wasn't love yet, not the kind you read about in books. It was quieter, a fragile thread of understanding between two souls who had both seen too much and trusted too little. But somewhere inside that quiet, a truth waited, a truth that neither of them was ready to face. Jack carried it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. Emma felt it in the way his voice softened whenever he said her name. And though the land around them seemed endless, both of them knew that something hidden, something buried in the dust of that ranch, would soon rise and change everything. That night, Emma stood by the window while the moonlight brushed across the field. Jack was out there, walking along the fence line, the limp in his step more pronounced now. She wondered what haunted him when the world went quiet, what loss he carried that had carved him so deep. She pressed her palm to the glass and whispered softly, "Don't break before I do, Jack." But the truth was they were both breaking, just in different ways. By mid-July, the land began to change. The corn stretched higher, and the air carried that heavy summer scent of dust and sunlight. The ranch no longer felt so empty. Every morning, Emma woke to the sound of Jack's boots on the porch and the soft clink of his coffee pot over the fire. Sometimes, before he noticed her watching, she'd smile to herself. It was strange how silence could feel like home when it belonged to the right person. Jack had stopped asking about her past. Maybe he sensed that the words would break her. And she didn't ask much about his either. Out here, pain didn't need explaining. It just lived quietly between two people, showing itself only in the way they looked at each other too long or didn't look at all. One afternoon, while searching for Jack, Emma wandered past the fields toward the far fence. The sun sat low, turning everything gold and quiet. Then she saw him. He was kneeling by a small wooden cross half buried in the ground. His hat lay beside him, his head bowed, his hand tracing something carved into the wood. Emma froze. She hadn't meant to see something private, but she couldn't move. The letters on the cross caught the light, Tim Mallory. A small tin locket hung from a nail in the wood. It shimmered softly in the sun. She stepped closer, and through the tiny glass, she could make out a faded photograph of a young boy smiling. Her breath caught. That name, Tim Mallory, was the one signed at the bottom of every letter that had brought her here. The letters filled with kindness and promise and hope. The letters that convinced her to cross the country for a future she thought was waiting. Jack turned slowly when he heard her behind him. His eyes were red, not from dust this time, but from memory. He didn't even try to hide it. "You were never supposed to meet me," he said quietly. "Not me, but the man he wanted me to be." Emma swallowed hard. "You lied to me." He nodded, staring at the cross. "Yeah, I did, but not for the reason you think. My brother wrote those letters before the sickness took him. He wanted someone to believe in this place, to believe in me." The wind moved through the grass like restless ghosts. Emma's throat ached. She wanted to be angry, but when she looked at him, she saw a man who had been carrying someone else's dream on his back for too long. "You don't have to carry it alone," she said softly. Jack looked at her hand resting on his arm. It was the first time she'd touched him without fear, and it wasn't pity, it was belonging. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The pain between them shifted into something fragile and real, something that could only exist between two broken hearts trying to heal. That night, the sky cracked open with thunder, and rain fell hard against the roof. The sound filled the cabin, wild and alive. Emma lay awake listening, watching the light flash across the window. For the first time in a long time, the rain didn't scare her. It sounded like forgiveness. But she didn't know yet that the same rain that washed the dust away would also bring something darker to the surface. When morning came, the world smelled new. The fields glistened, the air felt clean, and even Jack looked lighter somehow. But the rain didn't return again after that night. By early August, the earth had already begun to crack. The creek that ran near the ranch shrank to a muddy whisper. The corn leaves curled brown at the edges. Every day, the sun burned hotter, and every night, the wind carried nothing but dry dust. Emma tried to stay hopeful. She sang while she worked, carrying buckets from the creek, even though the water was low. Jack said little. but she could see the worry in the lines deepening around his eyes. His limp had grown worse, his patience shorter. Then, one day, the creek dried up completely. Jack hitched the wagon and rode into town. He came back late, his jaw tight, his eyes dark. "They're keeping the water," he said flatly. "So my brother owed them money before he died. They're calling it collection." Emma's mouth fell open. "But you helped them build that bridge last spring." Jack laughed once, dry and bitter. "Yeah, friendship dries up faster than a well." She reached for his hand, but he pulled away and sat on the porch, staring out at the horizon like it might give him an answer. The silence between them stretched wider than the prairie itself. That night, Emma wrote a letter she never sent. She wrote about fear and loneliness and how even the strongest man could crumble when hope ran dry. Then she tore it up, walked outside, and stood under the wide red moon. She found Jack by the barn, shoulders heavy, eyes on the stars. "Maybe I was wrong to bring you here," he said quietly. "This land kills everything I love." Her throat tightened. "Then let's fight it," she said. "The land, the drought, the people too, if we have to." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in weeks, something fierce burned behind his tired eyes. "You'd stand up to all of Pine Ridge for me. I'd stand up to the whole West if I had to." And for a moment, it wasn't about land or water or letters. It was about the kind of strength that doesn't come from the body, but from staying when every reason says to leave. Lightning flashed in the distance, far off, like a warning. And somewhere out there, men whispered Jack's name with spite. Trouble was coming, not from the sky this time, but riding straight toward them on horseback. By the third week of August, the land was begging for mercy. The soil cracked wide open, and the air shimmered with heat so sharp it hurt to breathe. The corn hung limp and brown, leaves whispering in a language that sounded like surrender. Dust coated everything, the porch, the dishes, even Emma's skin. Each breath felt like chewing sand. Jack spent most of his days pacing along the fence line, quiet, stubborn, eyes fixed on the horizon like he could force the clouds to come. Emma watched him from the doorway sometimes, her heart twisting. He looked like a man trying to hold the world together with nothing but his bare hands. That evening, she brought out 2 chipped mugs of coffee and sat beside him on the porch. The sky burned orange and red, the kind of sunset that should have been beautiful if it didn't carry so much sadness. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said softly. He didn't answer right away. The only sound was the wind scraping through the dry grass. Finally, he spoke, voice rough and low. "I keep asking myself if it's worth it. This land, this fight. Maybe some dreams aren't meant to live forever." Emma stared at him, his face shadowed by the fading light. "No," she whispered. "Dreams don't die, Jack. People just stop believing. And belief, that's what keeps a place alive." He looked at her then, really looked. Her hair clung to her neck with sweat, her face tired but soft, eyes bright as wildfire. For the first time in days, something flickered behind his eyes, a spark that hadn't been there before. "You told me this soil was 11 inches deep," she said, forcing a small smile. "You said it could grow anything if we worked hard enough. Maybe what it needs right now isn't water. Maybe it needs faith." Jack blinked, caught between disbelief and hope. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then something inside him shifted. The drought was still there, but the hopelessness cracked first. The next morning, they started digging trenches along the edge of the fields, trying to guide whatever moisture was left from the ground. It was backbreaking work. The sun beat down without mercy. But neither of them complained. Each shovel of dirt felt like defiance, a quiet rebellion against fate. By noon, Emma's hands were blistered, but she didn't stop. When her knees gave out, Jack reached down, his rough palm closing around hers. "That's enough," he said gently. She shook her head, breath trembling. "Not until I see something grow again." He smiled, a small, tired smile that carried more love than he'd ever said aloud. "You got more fire in you than anyone I've ever met." She laughed weakly. "And you got more stubbornness than sense." "Guess that's why we're still standing," he replied, brushing a streak of dust from her cheek. For a second, the world felt still. The heat, the dust, the ache, all of it faded, and there was only the warmth of that small, shared moment. As the sun began to sink, turning the fields into sheets of gold, they stood side by side, covered in sweat and dirt. Emma looked out at the horizon, her voice steady but soft. You can't control the rain, Jack, but you can control the fight inside you. The West doesn't reward the strong, it rewards the stubborn. He gave a tired laugh. Then I guess we'll fit right in. She smiled. Yeah, I guess we will. That night, the heat still clung to the walls, but the air between them felt lighter. They sat near the fire, neither saying much. Jack polished his old rifle, the metal glinting in the flicker of the flames. Emma stitched the tear in her dress where it had caught on a fence post. Do you ever wish you'd stayed somewhere else? She asked quietly. Jack didn't look up. Every man wishes he'd chosen an easier road. But the truth is, I wouldn't know what to do with peace if I had it. Emma watched him, her heart aching with something she couldn't name. You don't have to carry everything alone, you know. He finally lifted his eyes. Maybe not, he said, but it's all I've ever known. She leaned back in her chair, the firelight dancing in her tired eyes. Then maybe it's time you learn something new. The words lingered in the air between them, gentle but heavy with meaning. For the first time since she'd arrived, Emma wasn't the one who looked lost. She was the one holding the map, even if it was written in faith instead of ink. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering through the dry grass like a promise that hadn't been kept yet. Maybe tomorrow the rain would come. Maybe it wouldn't. But they'd already decided, no matter what the sky gave them, they'd keep fighting. Because sometimes love wasn't found in words or comfort, but in the shared silence between two tired souls who refused to give up. The next few days dragged on beneath a sky that refused to give mercy. The air turned to dust, the wind carried heat instead of relief, and the silence between the gusts felt like a warning that something was about to break. The ranch, once alive with the smell of wet earth, now tasted of despair. Emma woke one morning and found Jack sitting at the edge of the porch, elbows on his knees, staring at the cracked field. His hat lay beside him, his shirt damp with sweat. For a long time, she didn't speak. She just stood there, watching the man who had somehow become both her safety and her storm. You didn't sleep again, she said finally. Jack didn't turn, didn't feel like dreaming. His voice was tired, softer than she'd ever heard it. She sat down beside him, her dress brushing against his arm. Dreaming isn't always the enemy, Jack. He gave a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Out here it is. Dream too long, and the land eats you alive. She looked out over the dying corn. Then maybe we should feed it something else. He glanced at her, curious. Like what? Oh, she whispered. The kind that doesn't need rain. Jack exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time that morning. You talk like the world still listens, he said. Maybe it does, she said, her voice low. Maybe it's just waiting for someone to speak kindly again. For a moment, they sat in silence, the heat buzzing around them. The land looked defeated, but their eyes didn't. That afternoon, Jack rode into town. Emma stayed behind, tending what little was left of the garden. Each wilted leaf felt like a small heartbreak, but she kept working anyway. When he finally returned, the look on his face stopped her cold. His jaw was tight, his eyes darker than she'd ever seen them. What happened? She asked. He tossed his gloves onto the table and leaned against the wall, every muscle tense. They've taken the stream, said my brother's debt, makes the claim theirs now. Emma's stomach dropped. But you helped them build their dam bridge. Jack snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut. He caught himself, turned away, and pressed his palms to his face. Sorry, he muttered, quieter now. It's just it ain't right. Emma stepped closer, laying a gentle hand on his back. None of this is right, she said softly, but we'll figure it out. He didn't move for a long time. Then he whispered, This land has taken everything from me, Emma. My brother, my strength. Maybe now it's coming from my faith, too. She felt something break inside her hearing that. Then it can have mine, she said firmly, because I've got enough for both of us. He turned, eyes searching hers. There was no romance in that look, only gratitude and something rawer, deeper. A man realizing that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't alone anymore. Later that night, the air was thick and still. The moon glowed orange behind a veil of dust. Emma couldn't sleep again, so she stepped outside, her bare feet pressing into the dry wood of the porch. She saw Jack standing near the barn, his figure shadowed in silver light. She walked toward him slowly. "You're up late," she said softly. He didn't turn. "Can't rest when everything I love is falling apart." She came closer until she stood beside him. "You're not alone in that fight," she said. "You don't have to keep it all locked inside." He looked at her then, his voice quiet but shaking. "You don't understand, Emma. I don't know how to stop fighting. If I stop, I don't know who I am anymore." Her heart twisted. She reached for his hand, fingers trembling. "Then don't stop. Just fight different." He frowned slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Stop fighting everything around you," she said. "Start fighting for it instead. For this place, for us, for something that deserves to live." The words hung between them, fragile but alive. Jack's eyes softened, the anger in him flickering out like a candle at dusk. He didn't say anything. He just pulled her hand closer, pressing it against his chest where his heart beat strong and stubborn beneath the dust. "You feel that?" he murmured. "That's the only thing that still works right." Emma smiled faintly, tears gathering in her eyes. "Then let's make sure it keeps working." They stood there, the night wrapped around them, the stars dim through the haze of heat. It wasn't a perfect moment. There was too much pain for that, but it was honest. And honesty was a kind of love the world didn't see much of anymore. When they finally went inside, the fire had burned low. Jack sat down, staring into the embers. "You ever wonder," he said, "why the hardest places are the ones that feel most like home?" Emma thought about it for a long second. Maybe because we finally stop running when we reach them. Jack nodded slowly, his eyes softening. "Guess we stopped then." For the first time in weeks, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that comes when two broken souls realize they're both still standing, and maybe that's enough for now. The next morning arrived heavy and still. The wind didn't move, the birds didn't sing, and even the sky looked tired. Emma could feel the tension in the air long before she saw it in Jack's face. He was sitting by the table, letters spread out in front of him, every one yellowed by age and regret. She poured 2 cups of coffee and set one beside him. "Those from Tim." He nodded without looking up. "Yeah, found them in an old chest in the barn." His thumb traced a folded corner. "I used to read them when things got rough. Now I'm starting to think he was writing more to himself than me." Emma sat across from him, her fingers tightening around the warm mug. "Maybe he was trying to believe there was still something worth saving," she said softly. "Maybe he wanted to leave that belief with you." Jack looked at her then, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "If that's true, I've done a poor job keeping it alive." She leaned forward slightly. "You're still here, aren't you? That's half the fight." For a moment, neither spoke. The morning light spilled across the floor, dust swirling in its path. Outside, the cornfield stood still, lifeless but proud. By noon, a faint rumble rolled across the distance, not thunder but hooves. Emma stepped out onto the porch, squinting into the glare. 3 riders approached from the north, dust rising behind them like smoke. Jack came out beside her, jaw tightening. "I knew this was coming," he muttered. "Who are they?" "Carter's men. He runs the ranch up north. He's the one damming the stream." Emma's stomach tightened. She could see the men clearly now. Wide hats, sunburned faces, eyes hard from the kind of life that didn't leave much room for kindness. They stopped a few yards from the porch. The one in the middle tipped his hat, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Jack. Thought we'd come down and make sure you got our message." "I got it," Jack said evenly. "You're stealing water that doesn't belong to you." The man laughed, a dry sound. "Stealing? That's a big word for a man whose brother owed more than he could ever pay." Emma's hands curled into fists, but she stayed quiet. Jack stepped down from the porch, his boots sinking into the dust. "You had no right to cut off the creek. That stream's fed this land since my grandfather's time." "Then your grandfather should have written better contracts," the man sneered. Jack's shoulders tensed, but he didn't move. The silence that followed was so thick, it hummed. Finally, the man spat into the dirt. "You've got until the end of the week. After that, you and the lady pack up and leave." Ain't no place here for ghosts living off another man's debt. Emma's pulse raced. She wanted to speak, to shout, but Jack's voice came calm and low. This land's not for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone. The man smirked. We'll see. When the riders left, dust rose high into the air, choking the sunlight. Jack stood there long after they were gone, fists tight at his sides. Emma walked up slowly and touched his arm. You can't fight them alone. He turned to her, his eyes burning. Then who else is going to fight, Emma? You think anyone in Pine Ridge cares if we lose this land? They've been waiting for me to fail since the day I buried my brother. Her throat ached at the sound of his voice. Then let me fight with you, she whispered. Jack shook his head, half angry, half afraid. You don't understand. These men don't care about right or wrong. They'll burn this place down if it means winning. She stepped closer, her hand finding his. Then we rebuild. Together. He looked at her, really looked, and for a second the anger fell away. There was fear behind his eyes, not for himself, but for her. You don't belong in this kind of world, Emma. Maybe not, she said softly, but I chose it. I chose you. And I'm not running again. He stared at her for a long time, then nodded slowly, his chest rising with a breath that sounded like surrender and faith mixed together. All right, he said. Then we do it your way. That night, they worked until the moon climbed high. They gathered what water they could from the old well, patched holes in the barn, and reinforced the fence line. Every movement was heavy, but neither complained. At one point, Emma stopped and watched Jack for the doorway. The lamplight brushed across his face, highlighting the years of hurt carved deep into his skin. He looked up, catching her eyes, and smiled, just a little. It was tired, unpolished, but real. Why are you smiling? She asked quietly. Because for the first time in a long time, he said, I ain't fighting alone. Something in her heart softened then, like the earth after rain. For the first time, she believed that maybe, just maybe, this place could still bloom again, if not with crops, then with courage. And as the night stretched on, the two of them kept working, side by side, sweat and dust and faith binding them closer than any promise ever could. But what neither of them knew was that the real storm wasn't the drought. It was the people who were coming for what little they had left. The week passed slower than time itself. Every sunrise felt heavier, every sunset sharper. Emma could see the worry deepening in Jack's eyes, the kind that didn't need words anymore. He barely slept, barely ate. Each day, he'd walk the land, running his hands over the dry soil as if apologizing to it for not being enough. On the seventh day, the air felt strange, too quiet, too still. Even the wind seemed to hide. Emma stood by the window, her heart pacing faster than her thoughts. The sun was sinking low when she heard the distant sound of horses again. Jack was already on the porch before she reached the door. 3 riders came down the dirt road, the same men from before, Carter's men, this time with more behind them. Dust clouded the air as they approached, sunlight glinting off their rifles. Emma stepped outside beside Jack, her palms cold despite the heat. Stay inside, he said softly without looking at her. I'm not hiding. He turned then, eyes steady on hers. Please, Emma, if something happens. Nothing's going to happen, she said, even though her voice trembled. Not while I'm here. The rider stopped a few yards from the porch. Carter himself was there this time, older, leaner, with a face carved from pride. He smiled like a man who already thought he'd won. Evening, Jack, he drawled. Pretty place you got here. Shame about the drought. Jack's voice stayed even. You can leave now. You've said your piece. Carter chuckled. Oh, I ain't here to talk. I'm here to collect what's owed. The creek, the land, everything that once belonged to your brother, and everything you've been squatting on since. Emma stepped forward before she could stop herself. You call this collecting? You're just stealing what you couldn't earn. The men behind Carter laughed. One of them spat into the dirt. Lady's got a mouth on her, he said. Jack's jaw tightened. You don't talk to her, he warned, voice low. Carter's smile faded. Then pay up, Mallory. Or pack up. Jack shook his head. You'll have to take it from me. For a moment, the air stilled completely. No sound, no wind, just the weight of those words hanging in the air. Carter dismounted slowly, stepping closer until the two men stood eye to eye. You really want to do this? Jack didn't move. I already am. Carter's fist came fast, catching Jack across the jaw. Emma screamed, running forward, but one of the riders grabbed her arm. She fought against him, the fear and rage burning through her like fire. Let her go, Jack roared, lunging forward despite the hit. The two men crashed into the dirt, fists flying, dust rising in angry clouds around them. Carter was bigger, but Jack was meaner in that moment. Years of loss, pain, and pride all pouring out at once. Emma tore free and grabbed a shovel leaning against the fence. She swung it with all her strength, hitting the man who'd held her. He stumbled back, cursing, his gun falling into the dirt. Jack pushed Carter off him, panting hard. You're done here, he shouted. You hear me? Carter wiped the blood from his mouth, smirking even through the pain. You're a dead man, Mallory. Maybe not today, but soon. He spat into the dirt again, then turned to his men. Let's ride. The sound of their horses faded into the distance, leaving behind nothing but dust and the echo of what almost became disaster. Emma dropped the shovel, shaking. Her knees gave out, and Jack caught her before she hit the ground. It's okay, he said softly, pulling her close. They're gone. She pressed her face against his chest, the smell of sweat and dirt and fear filling her lungs. They'll come back, she whispered. You know they will. He didn't lie. Yeah, he said quietly. They will. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. Then we'll be ready next time. Jack studied her face, saw the fear, the strength, the fire that hadn't died, even after everything. You shouldn't have to live like this, he said. She smiled faintly through tears. Maybe this is living, Jack, fighting for something that matters. He brushed his thumb across her cheek, wiping away the dirt and the tears together. You deserve peace, Emma. So do you, she said. Maybe we'll find it together. They stood there until the sun disappeared completely, the sky turning bruised and dark above them. The air smelled of dust and gunpowder and something else, something almost holy. Later, when night fell, the two of them sat by the fire in silence. Jack's knuckles were bruised, his lips split, but his eyes were calm now. Emma rested her head against his shoulder. You think we'll make it through this? She asked quietly. He stared into the flames. We already are. Outside, the wind finally stirred again, carrying the first cool breath of night. For the first time in weeks, the stars looked clear. But somewhere out in that same darkness, trouble was still moving, closer than either of them realized. The next morning came quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a storm that hasn't yet decided whether it's truly over. The ranch was still standing, though every board, every nail seemed to carry the memory of the night before. Emma walked outside, barefoot, feeling the cool dirt under her feet. The sky, for the first time in weeks, was soft and gray, heavy with clouds that looked almost merciful. Jack was sitting on the porch steps, his hands resting on his knees, his face bruised but calm. When he looked up at her, there was no anger left, just something tired and gentle. You should have left when you had the chance, he said quietly. Emma shook her head, her eyes soft but steady. And miss this view? She teased, motioning toward the horizon. He smiled faintly. Ain't much to look at. Maybe not to you, she said. But to me, it's the first place that feels like it's worth fighting for. Jack looked out at the land, the broken fence, the wilted corn, the empty creek bed, and for the first time he didn't see failure. He saw a beginning. You think this place still has a chance? He asked. Emma stepped closer, kneeling beside him. Everything does. You just have to believe in what's left instead of what's gone. He reached for her hand, rough and calloused, and she took it without hesitation. You sound like my brother, he said softly. Then maybe he sent me, she whispered. The clouds thickened overhead, the air turning cool. A faint wind brushed across the field, carrying the smell of wet earth. Jack stood slowly, watching as the first raindrop fell, small, uncertain, but real. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the dry dirt began to darken, tiny splashes forming in the cracks. Emma laughed, a sound that broke through the silence like a song. She stepped out into the rain, lifting her face to the sky as it began to pour. Jack followed, the water running down his face, mixing with the dirt and the blood until he felt clean again for the first time in years. The rain didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the debt or the danger. But it reminded them that nothing stayed dry forever. Not the earth, not the heart. Days later, the corn began to lift its tired head again. Small shoots of green pushed through the soil, fragile but determined. Jack built a new fence, and Emma planted wildflowers by the porch. The ranch still creaked and sighed like an old wound, but it was alive again, breathing, growing, forgiving. One evening, they sat together by the fire, the room glowing soft with lamplight. Jack looked at her and said, "You changed this place, Emma." She smiled. "No, Jack. We did. Together." He nodded, staring into the flames. "I used to think the land only gave back what it was given. But now I think it gives back what it sees, and for the first time it's seeing something worth keeping." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Maybe that's what love is, planting something that might outlive you." The fire popped quietly, and outside, the night hummed with crickets. The world was still hard, still unfair, but for once, it didn't feel cruel. It felt earned. As the rain returned that night, tapping softly against the roof, Emma whispered, "Do you ever wonder if Tim's watching?" Jack smiled gently. "If he is, I think he's finally resting easy." They sat like that for a long time. No more running, no more fighting the ghosts that lived in the dust. Just two souls who'd found peace not by escaping their pain, but by facing it together. And maybe that was the lesson the land had been trying to teach them all along. That even in the harshest soil, something beautiful can grow. That strength isn't about never breaking. It's about breaking and still choosing to begin again. That love, real love, isn't the absence of struggle. It's the quiet decision to stay when leaving would be easier. As the rain fell steady and sure, the world outside shimmered in silver light. The earth drank deeply, and somewhere deep within it, hope took root again.